They took her rifle in front of everyone, not for protocol, not for safety, to humiliate her, to prove she didn't belong on that field with the rest of the unit. The instructor made sure everyone saw it. Made sure they knew what it meant. She was being set up to fail in the most public way possible. What happened 90 seconds later would force an entire elite combat team to question everything they thought they knew about warfare. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. She stood there unarmed, surrounded by fully geared operators who expected her to break. The exercise began, and then she moved. The convoy arrived just before dawn, cutting through the desert heat in a column of armored vehicles that kicked up clouds of dust against the razor wire perimeter. The Joint Expeditionary Training Facility stretched across the horizon like a small fortified city, observation towers rising at every corner, concrete bunkers dotting the landscape between modular barracks and weapons depots. This was not a place for the uncertain. This was where the best came to prove they belonged among the even better. Operators began disembarking, their movements sharp and efficient, calling out to one another by call signs earned through years of deployments. Gear clanked as rifles were checked, magazines inspected, tactical vests adjusted with the kind of casual precision that only came from muscle memory. The energy was competitive, almost electric. Everyone here had something to prove, even if they pretended otherwise. Revka Ansal stepped down from the last vehicle without fanfare. She wore the same fatigues as everyone else, carried the same standard-issue rifle slung across her back, but there was something different. No patches on her shoulders, no unit insignia, no visible rank. She moved with a kind of economy that suggested nothing wasted, nothing excessive. While others traded jokes and greetings, she simply walked toward the equipment bay in silence. Eyes followed her. Whispers started almost immediately. A few operators exchanged glances, the kind that asked questions without words. Who was she? Why was she here? What clearance level brought someone with no identifiable credentials to a Tier 1 joint exercise? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, and Revka seemed entirely aware of them. She just did not care. Inside the equipment bay, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as operators claimed lockers and began the methodical process of inventorying their gear. Revka found an empty station in the far corner, away from the clusters of conversation. She laid out her rifle on the workbench, field-stripped it with practiced hands, inspected each component with focused attention. Her movements were deliberate, each gesture stripped of unnecessary motion. From across the bay, Sergeant Major Cullen Drave watched her. He was a man carved from decades of military discipline, his face weathered by sun and sand, his posture rigid even in casual observation, decorated, respected, old guard in every sense. He had commanded men in theaters most people could not pronounce, and he had earned his authority through blood and sweat. He did not like mysteries, and Revka Ansal was a mystery he had not asked for. Lieutenant Ferris Kyle stood beside him, younger, ambitious, eager to mirror whatever authority figure nearest to him. He followed Drave's gaze toward the woman in the corner and leaned in slightly. Who cleared her for Tier 1 exercises? Kyle asked quietly. Drave did not answer. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the operation center. Kyle followed, glancing back once at Revka, who had not looked up from her rifle once. In the far corner of the bay, mounted discreetly near the ceiling, a small surveillance camera angled downward. Its lens was pointed directly at Revka's workstation. She noticed it as she reassembled her rifle, sliding the bolt carrier back into place with a smooth click. She looked up at the camera, held its mechanical gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away and continued her work. The operations center was all business. Large monitors displayed satellite imagery of the training zones, real-time weather data, topographical overlays. A dozen personnel moved between stations, preparing for the exercise that would begin in less than 2 hours. Drave entered with Kyle at his heels and moved directly to the main briefing theater where the unit would soon assemble. 30 operators gathered in tiered seating, the room filling with the low hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. These were people who trusted each other, or trusted the process that had brought them all here. Drave stepped to the podium at the front, and the room fell silent almost instantly. "Operation Redstone," he began, his voice carrying the weight of command. Multi-phase combat simulation designed to test decision-making under suppressive fire, urban breach tactics, and sustained engagement against a coordinated enemy force. This exercise would push them harder than most live deployments. JSOC evaluators would be watching remotely, he explained, and performance metrics would influence future deployment eligibility. This was not just training. This was sorting. His eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Revka, who sat alone in the back row. She did not slouch. She did not fidget. She simply sat, hands folded in her lap, watching him with an expression that gave nothing away. For those unfamiliar with joint protocols, Drave continued, his tone sharpening slightly, this is a qualified operators-only environment. If you are here, you have earned it. If you cannot keep pace. He paused, and the pause was pointed. We will know. A few heads turned toward Revka. She did not react. Her face remained calm, almost neutral, but there was something in the stillness of her posture that suggested she had heard every word and calculated its intent. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes. Objectives were outlined. Threat assessments were presented. Rules of engagement were clarified. When it ended, the operators filed out in groups, most of them already forming fire teams, comparing gear, speculating about who would perform best under pressure. Revka walked alone down the corridor outside the briefing room. Two operators, Ilska and Torbin, passed her going the opposite direction. Ilska was tall, sharp-featured, quick with opinions. Torbin was broader, quieter, but no less skeptical. Diversity higher or political favor? Ilska said, her voice low but loud enough. She did not bother looking back. Either way, Torbin replied, she won't last past phase 1. Revka kept walking. Her expression did not change. She turned a corner and disappeared from view. The barracks assigned to her was sparse. A metal frame bed, a footlocker, a single window overlooking the training yard. She set her pack down and began unpacking with the same methodical care she had shown in the equipment bay. Everything had a place. Everything was accounted for. On the bed, placed neatly in the center, was a manila folder. Unmarked. She picked it up, opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, heavily redacted. Black bars covered most of the text. Only one line remained visible at the bottom, operational authorization. Compartmented access required. She stared at it for a moment, her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then she closed the folder, set it aside, and continued unpacking as if nothing had happened. The training yard at midday was a stretch of packed earth surrounded by low concrete buildings and chain-link fencing. Heat shimmered off the ground in visible waves. Operators assembled in formation for the pre-exercise weapons check, a standard procedure meant to ensure all equipment was accounted for and functional. Revka stood in line with the others, rifle slung across her back, sidearm holstered at her hip. Drave approached with Kyle and two other senior instructors flanking him. They moved down the line slowly, inspecting gear, asking questions, making notes on clipboards. When Drave reached Revka, he stopped. "Ansal," he said. "Sergeant Major," she replied. "I have reviewed your file. Your qualifications are..." He paused, searching for the word. "Minimal for this tier of exercise." Silence spread outward from where they stood. Operators nearby stopped their own conversations, attention shifting toward the confrontation. Revka did not move. She met his gaze evenly, waiting. "In the interest of safety and fairness," Drave said, louder now, making sure the entire formation could hear, "I am adjusting your loadout." He extended his hand, palm up. The meaning was clear. Your rifle. Now. Revka did not move immediately. Her eyes held his for a beat longer than was comfortable. There was no defiance in her expression, no submission either, just calculation. Then, slowly, she unslung the rifle from her shoulder and placed it in his waiting hand. You will participate unarmed, Drave continued, his tone formal, clinical. Consider it an opportunity to observe how real operators function under pressure. A few stifled laughs came from somewhere in the formation. Kyle, standing behind Drave, allowed himself a small grin. Others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether this was protocol or something else entirely. Revka nodded once. Understood, she said. Drave turned and walked away, rifle in hand. The other instructors followed. The formation began to break apart as operators moved toward the staging area for the exercise. Conversations resumed, quieter now, laced with speculation. Ilska leaned toward Torbin as they walked. She'll be out in 5 minutes, she said. Generous, Torbin replied. Revka stood alone for a moment longer, watching the unit move away. She adjusted her gloves, checked her watch. Her face was stone. Then she followed. In the control room overlooking the simulation zones, a JSOC observer sat at a monitoring station, surrounded by screens displaying live feeds from cameras positioned throughout the training area. He was older, weathered, with the kind of stillness that came from years of watching operations unfold from a distance. His name was Colonel Idris Hask, though no one in the room had been introduced to him yet. He leaned forward slightly, watching one particular screen. It showed Revka walking across the yard toward the staging area, unarmed, alone. Hask keyed his radio. Confirm Ansal is participating. Drave's voice came back after a moment. Affirmative. Unarmed. A long pause. Hask's face darkened. His hand hovered over the transmit button. Then he released it without speaking. He sat back in his chair, eyes still on the monitor. Christ, he muttered to himself. He did not stop the exercise. The urban warfare simulation zone was a sprawling network of concrete structures designed to mimic a hostile village. Narrow alleys twisted between buildings. Blind corners opened onto kill zones. Rooftops provided vantage points that could turn into death traps in seconds. It was a place built to punish mistakes. The unit split into fire teams. Revka was assigned to Kyle's squad, 4 operators including him, all fully armed. Kyle gave her a brief glance as they assembled. Standard sweep, he said to his team. Ansal, stay back. Don't interfere. She nodded. No argument, no protest. The exercise began with the sharp crack of simulated gunfire echoing off concrete walls. Blanks and laser designators filled the air with noise and light. Impact sensors embedded in tactical vests would register hits, lighting up red to indicate elimination. Opfer, the opposing force, played by base instructors dressed in black, engaged from rooftops and windows with coordinated aggression. Kyle's team advanced down a main corridor, weapons up, moving with practiced fluidity. Revka followed at a distance, observing, saying nothing. The tempo increased. Opfer fire intensified. Torbin, moving on the left flank, caught a burst from an upper window. His vest lit up red. He swore, stepped out of the engagement zone. Kyle cursed under his breath and pushed the team forward harder. Ilska attempted to flank right, slipping into a side alley. She made it 3 steps before Opfer caught her in a crossfire. Her vest flared red. She shook her head, frustration visible, and moved to the sideline. Kyle and the last operator, Maddox, were now isolated in the center of the zone. Opfer began closing in from multiple directions. Kyle keyed his radio. "Where the hell is Ansal?" he barked. No answer. Revka had already moved. Not forward, around. She slipped into a narrow side passage that most operators would have dismissed as a dead end. She moved quickly, silently, using shadow and angles to stay invisible. Within seconds, she was behind the OPFOR line. An OPFOR instructor crouched on a rooftop, scanning for targets below. A shadow moved behind him. Before he could turn, Revka was there. Her hands moved with surgical precision. Wrist control, leverage. His rifle was stripped from his grip in under 2 seconds. She tapped his shoulder with the barrel of his own weapon. His vest went red. She dropped the rifle and moved. Below, in the courtyard, Kyle and Maddox were pinned. OPFOR advanced from 2 directions, coordinated, overwhelming. Then, suddenly, OPFOR vests began lighting up. 1, 2, 3, rapid succession. Kyle spun around, weapon raised. Revka emerged from behind the eliminated OPFOR instructors, hands empty, no weapon in sight. 3 instructors lay on the ground, disarmed, their vests glowing red. Kyle stared. "You're clear," Revka said calmly. Then she walked past him without waiting for a response. In the control room, Drave stood at the main console, watching multiple feeds simultaneously. His face was tight, confused. "How many OPFOR are down in Sector 3, he asked. The technician checked the system. 7, sir. All within 90 seconds. Drave leaned closer. "Who?" The technician hesitated, then checked again. "Ansel." Drave's hands gripped the edge of the console. He stared at the screen showing Revka moving through the simulation zone, unarmed, untouched, efficient. His jaw worked silently. "Initiate Phase 2, he said, his voice barely controlled. "Now." "Sir," the observer's voice came over the comms, "that is ahead of schedule." "I said now," Drave snapped. The announcement echoed across the training zone through mounted loudspeakers. Phase 2 commencing. All units regroup and prepare for secondary objective. Revka, walking alone through the smoke and dust, heard the announcement. She did not react. She simply checked her watch and kept moving. If you have ever witnessed someone being underestimated, share your thoughts below. And if this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. Like it. Phase 2 was not supposed to begin for another 40 minutes. The unit had barely regrouped from Phase 1 when the loudspeakers crackled to life with new orders. Operators exchanged confused glances, checking gear that had not yet been fully reset. This was not protocol. Something had changed. In the control room, Drave stood rigid at the main console, his knuckles white against the edge of the metal surface. The technician beside him hesitated before speaking. "Sir, OPFOR is still repositioning from Phase 1. If we initiate now, they won't be at full strength." "Double the OPFOR," Drave said, his voice clipped. "No restrictions." The observer's voice came through the comms, cautious. "That is outside protocol, Sergeant Major." "She is a liability," Drave replied without looking away from the screens. "I am proving it." The technician typed commands into the system. On the monitors, additional OPFOR units began mobilizing, instructors pulling on black tactical vests and moving into positions throughout the simulation zone. The odds were being stacked deliberately, visibly. This was no longer an evaluation. This was an elimination. The new objective flashed across every operator's heads-up display and was announced over the loudspeakers. Breach a fortified structure. Neutralize high-value targets inside. Time limit, 8 minutes. OPFOR resistance will be significant.